Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let's stay on schedule. Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome. My name is Thomas Meredith, and I'm the Senior Marketing Director here at RTM Consulting, and I will be moderating today's webcast. So on behalf of RTM Consulting, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Trends and Best Practices for Designing a Superior Customer Experience. Quickly, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items, save folks the time to ask this question when we get started. We will make a copy of the deck available. If you're interested in receiving a copy, just email your request to info@RTM Consulting, and we'll send one out to you. That email address is info@rtmconsulting.net. Let us know your request, and we'll get you a PDF copy. We are also recording the webcast. You will be receiving an automated email from Citrix from GoToWebinar and let you know when that webcast is ready, and you can view at your convenience, as well as share that link with anybody in your organization who can't join and wants to watch it at a later time. So we are recording, and we'll make that available for everyone. As always, we take questions throughout the webcast. You have a panel there, a window there on your GoToWebinar panel at the bottom. Feel free to enter your questions. We'll have a brief Q&A session at the end of the webcast that I will be moderating. So I'll be pulling those questions that everyone enters in there throughout the webcast. I'll pull those all together, and we'll spend some time at the end of the webcast answering your questions. So with that, let me get out of the way and we'll get started. Presenting today's webinar is Randy Mislovic. Randy is the managing partner of our field services practice, as well as president and CEO of RTM Consulting. Randy, welcome. I'll hand it off to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Thomas. Do a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Audio sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Randy Mislovic, and welcome to our broadcast this afternoon. We really appreciate you joining us, and we're hoping we'll make this hour a valuable one for every one of you here. The Trends and Best Practices for Designing a Superior Customer Experience. I was talking with my co-speaker here, Bill Golaski from TSIA, and Bill introduce himself here in a couple of minutes. And one of the places as it relates to field services that he and I share a common point of view on is that the customer experience that we deliver in our field services organizations is very much predicated on a variety of cross-functional processes that need to come together to produce the right experience for our customers and to do it at the most effective and efficient way possible. And service engineering is I've been in the business for come on more than 35 years now in a tech field, and I've seen the evolution of the service engineering function over the years, and quite frankly, this person's viewpoint is in many cases going in the wrong direction relative to having the things or piece parts in place in order to produce a superior customer experience. And so Val and I got together and decided we wanted to shed some light on this topic and some ideas and thoughts that we have on things we've seen in the marketplace that are working for other companies, and wanted to share some of those experiences. Again, this time will be valuable for all of you. So with that, let me just work to this afternoon's webcast. We're going to start with some brief introductions for myself and Val, and then I want to dive into some perspectives on the customer experience. I'm sure every field services organization is under lots of pressure to deliver a superior customer experience, and that's sometimes or always within a framework of what you do on the support side of your business, your professional services operations, your sales functions. But we're going to deep dive into things that are FS, field services related, that we think have an impact on the customer experience. RTM Consulting would like to share with you a framework for service engineering that we use with our prospects clients when they are trying to develop superior customer service experiences. I'd like to share with you a framework we use to help guide them towards creating the right set of processes and structures to help us do that. TSA, in this case, Val is going to take the time to share their research and findings in this area, and Val's got some, I think, very interesting perspectives to share that are very relevant to this whole area of producing a better customer experience and putting field services, quite frankly, at the forefront of how to drive not only a better customer experience, but putting field services more as a growth engine in the business, and so I'll leave it to him to share some details there. The whole idea then of how do I transform from where I am to where I would like to be. I'm going to just share a little bit of perspectives from our Tim's Consulting's point of view about how we help customers go from where they are to where they might want to be, and then, as Thomas indicated, we'll take some time to answer some questions at the end. Our simple elevator speech is our Tim Consulting, we're headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. We are experts in services business transformation. So if you're in a tech company, industrial automation company, a medical device manufacturer, but run a services operation, whether it's field services, support services, professional services, help, educational services, et cetera. That's what our sweet spot is, and we help companies get better at how they run those support and service operations in their business. While we're located in Cincinnati, we're doing business on 5 continents. We have over 100 clients worldwide, and we're proud to be a part of the technology field and in the service transformation efforts that are going on in this industry today. Briefly about me, I won't spend a lot of time here. I started my career at IBM, and so I have exposure across a full range of hardware, software, services, including work I did for a company called Convergys here in Cincinnati. I've run 2 startups, but my passion is around services transformation, and so hopefully you'll get a sense for that as I go through my content today, in addition to what Val's going to do. This is available from our website, rtimconsulting.net. You can get a sense for who we do business with and some of the many clients that we're proud to have as customers of ours. You'll see lots of both hardware and software firms available in there. Lots of them are household names, as hopefully is evident from that slide. So anyway, with that, I'll give Val the floor for a moment to introduce himself.
Great. Thanks, Randy, for the invitation, and look forward to today's webinar. Just quickly, I head up the research and advisory for field services within the Technology Services Industry Association. I bring close to 30 years of service and sales experience at companies as large as Xerox Business Services, Kodak, Bank of America, as well as a number of smaller mid-stage startups. I've written a book and gotten the business process 10, where I've documented some of those assignments, and look forward to the discussion today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Val. And again, thanks for joining us today. So when we set out the broadcast note, we had 4 things in mind that we were intending to accomplish in today's webcast. One is just, as I mentioned in my opening comments, that the service engineering function in many companies, at least at one time, was where how we were going to provide effective services was born. And so whether it was in a new product development or whether it was in our existing product portfolio, is at one time service engineering was pretty prevalent in the industry, and I've seen over the years it evolved to where I know there are some companies where I would call very superior service engineering functions that are really thinking about the customer experience in a holistic way, but quite frankly the majority of those we've seen either have not done that, have it very, I'll say, broken into lots of pieces and various functions with lots of handoffs between those functions, or we see that the service engineering discipline has just almost completely disappeared from the experience, and we have a collection of people developing a particular service experience for a particular product in a particular place in an organization. And we're going to, one of our key messages today is to think more holistically about how you want to create and conduct service design for your customers, and so more to come on that. So we will talk about the service engineering function, and again, I not to confuse that with, while there are organizational implications, is want to talk just about the elements of the service engineering function and its impact on delivering better customer experience outcomes. A third is just how to share ideas on, we want to share ideas on how to organize and measure and govern the SC function and their impact on customer service. And then last is how do you build better accountability into the function. Again, what that becomes is in any organization, we're going to have some amount of cross-functional dependencies, and how do we get those cross-functional entities, again, to work in a seamless way so that the customer feels like one experience is coming from the customer as opposed to a series of handoffs within a particular enterprise. And I think as we know, as users at times, those handoffs don't always feel right when you're the person that's sitting at the other end of the table. So those are the four things we're hoping to accomplish in our webcast today. I'll dive into perspectives on the customer experience, and I'll offer some RTM consulting points of view on this, and Val will follow up with a different point of, not a different point of view, but another angle around how we think about how this all impacts the customer experience. So, I've in my career and in our current business, we deal across the service domains: professional, support, field, educational services, and I can't think of a single service domain that is more complicated than field services. It just has by its nature of what we do in field services, there are a lot of different things that have to be considered when we're thinking about how we're going to produce a superior customer experience. And by the way, to do that in an efficient way, lowest possible cost, best possible result, producing a better outcome for our customers. And so I'll quickly run around the circle, and I'm sure this will ring true with or familiar with the folks that have joined us today for today's webcast is, product reliability. Hopefully we started in engineering and R&D from the beginning of hopefully designing a product that is going to break as little as possible, if not ever. Now we know that there's no perfect product, but we're trying to design something that hopefully from the beginning isn't going to break. Serviceability, though, is a close second behind that. So when it does break, have we designed the product in a way that it can be easily serviced? Components or parts that are easily accessed. That perhaps we have remote diagnostics capability. We can diagnose these things from a remote site without having to send a field tech and maybe sometimes solve the problem with the software download or whatever. But serviceability important so that when I do have to go out there and fix it, can I fix it in as rapidly as possible, least expensive way? Part supply and availability. What parts do I need to stock? Where am I going to stock them? How am I going to manage the cost of those parts, right? So there's a lot around the whole parts things, and there's issues around the regulations and taxation in the places we buy those parts and things, trade implications, et cetera. Support processes, that's a big one, right? What does happen when the customer's product breaks? And so, we use in our company, we talk about this methodology of shifting left. How do I move from the high-cost channels of always solving a problem with the field tech going out in a truck to starting to try to address more problems that might be operationally related or something that could have handled with a remote diagnostic and solved with the software update as an example. So really getting a good fix on right kind of software processes. Our depot infrastructure, where does that fit in those support processes? What's going to go to the depot? Is that a warranty option? How's that going to work? Technology and experience is really important here. Is when I launch a new product, what's going to help my tech be able to quickly diagnose a problem, fix it in the shortest possible time, what experience level is necessary to do that, in addition to all the things that our FS organizations deal with around labor costs and availability of people and capacity planning and those sorts of things. Service offer design and pricing is when I want to build the right kind of customer experience, what's the expectation that I do set with the customer in our offer design and pricing, and how do I deliver against it? And then certainly last but not least, and quite frankly, actually the beginning point of probably the thinking of this whole circle is, what does my customer expect from us? Is what's the service level they're going to want, and what's going to make them happy, and what's going to make them want to come back? So these things are all things that are important, and as we look over what we see at RTM Consulting in so many places is too often these functions of what we would call things that are part of an SC function, whether they are organizationally connected or not, but at the very least, hopefully cross-functionally connected. These things need to be considered together as we're thinking about what is the customer experience we want to deliver, and how are these things going to interact with each other to produce a superior a customer experience. So this whole notion of having a holistic design, and we're going to give you some good examples of how to think about this thing as a whole, some tools that will hopefully help you with that in your efforts to do that in your businesses, and potentially you call them folks like us to help you with that, or the folks at TSI to get research data or other ideas that might be helpful to you in your journey in producing a better customer experience. I want to let Val comment on this slide because it makes a similar point but from a different perspective. And so Val, why don't you go ahead and I'll let you talk about this one.
Sure. Thanks, Randy. And I think in addition to the design considerations that you just talked about, I think one of the things that we all have to understand is at the end of the day, field services is a delivery organization. And so I also like to look at it from a slightly different view and the whole value chain. So, as Randy talked about, yeah, of course, we'd like to prevent the incident from happening, but when it does, we have to schedule it, we have to dispatch, and both parts and people to get to the customer location. But then, what happens, in terms of the diagnosis and the repair time, and how are you going to go about conducting that repair? Having the right parts available is becoming more and more critical, and we'll talk about some of these industry trends in terms of, delivering outcomes, how important spare parts is to make sure that the customer gets up and running as quickly as possible. We also see, as part of that value chain, field service engineers are in a very unique position to capture what's really happening out in the customer location, both from a what's good and what's bad. And so how you capture that data and are able to use that data is important to work into any product design, any service design. And as a result of being on site, you have an opportunity to look at new ways to drive revenue. How do you incorporate that into your mobility platforms, and how do you design from the initial launch subsequent offers that could be brought to bear? And then, of course, getting parts back to lighten the load on your inventory purchases, all are part of this service engineering function, and really looking at what happens after the initial sale. Because as you'll see, I think the majority of revenue is going to be coming after that initial sale versus how it used to work in the past with that I'll call upfront CapEx spending. So it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, but these are just a slightly different way to look at it.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. That was helpful, and again, a different perspective, but equally important purpose we're trying to address. So just to summarize this section, as the key message again that both of us want to deliver here is that is critical to the customer experience is that these elements are not always designed holistically, and at the very least, irrespective of how they may be organized, and we'll come to that point in a moment, is thinking about these things collectively together and creating a blueprint for how am I going to deliver that superior customer experience is pretty important to delivering predictable outcomes for your customers. And when we don't do that, the implications we see are low customer sat, internal inefficiencies that are a result of just planning that didn't really didn't hit the target as from the beginning. So we think service engineering is where this customer experience design role should live. And it doesn't mean it has to be that way, but it is a place where we've seen organizations be more successful in having somebody really thinking about an engineering to customer experience in the same place, and then orchestrating how the cross-functional organizations bring those capabilities together. Service engineering, as we've dubbed this, is re-emerging. We think it's a critical function in hardware-centric companies. I was to pick a trend in field services over the next 3 to 5 years that I think we're going to see. I think because there's so much focus on the customer experience, what Val was talking about on the prior page, and what I know some of our clients have talked about as far as value engineering, is we think service engineering is going to be a discipline we're going to see reemerge as much more central in the thinking of hardware-centric companies and how they deliver not only better customer experience but better revenue growth in their businesses. So I shared that I wanted to talk about a framework for service engineering. So without further ado, I want to introduce what this really is, and we have frameworks across the service domains that we service. So we have a framework for field services, we have one for support, we have one for PS, and in this case we have a sub-framework for service engineering that I'd like to share with you. And the reason we think a framework is important is it helps to visualize these interrelationships and capabilities that you need to deliver a superior customer experience. And we've created one that we think is generic but specific enough to a technology hardware company that it can be used as, at a very least, a starting point, but quite frankly, a pretty good endpoint for many, many companies as it relates to what they want to do for service engineering. And that blueprint then becomes a tool for planning, communicating, designing a desired end state, and it's a place where the team can rally around. Look, this is a picture that we want to get to, capability-wise, perhaps organizationally-wise, and so as you're doing that work, you can use the framework to decompose where you're at. You can use it to compare and contrast where you might want to be. You can use it to actually construct a future state. And so very specifically, this is our service engineering framework. We developed it to help tech companies, deliver a superior customer experience, and by the way, do it in the most efficient manner possible. And it's made up of these three essential layers, which I'll show you here on this page. Is essentially we integrate, as all of our frameworks do, as I'm thinking about service engineering, what is our strategy? How we're going to go about this? What's the charter for the function? What kind of people do we need in it? How are we going to manage the financial model? How are we going to organize? How are we going to govern? How do we know when we're successful? There's a second layer, which is our go-to-market layer, and I'll talk on the next page a little bit about each of these boxes here in the middle because they're pretty relevant to, I'll say, the meat of a good service engineering environment or function, to include new product development, your existing product portfolio, your field support operations and people, and then customer support capabilities that you have that generally would work in concert with your field support teams. And then operational infrastructure to include the technology and tools and help desk software, knowledge management capabilities, and training of your techs and those sorts of things. So the framework, again, is, I won't say covers every single element of what you might want to have in your service engineering framework, but it does, again, create, I'll say, a generic, very solid starting point for thinking about service engineering and how it is going to be used as a tool to deliver a superior customer experience to your customers. These four boxes, though, are the ones I really wanted to dig a little or dive a little deeper into, and they're really, these four things really need to be tightly integrated, and again, from a service engineering standpoint. So we all know that, when we design a new product, as I mentioned earlier, we all hope that R&D is taking the time to think about building a reliable product that, by the way, when it does break, that we've really considered how do we fix that thing for the least possible cost in the shortest possible period of time. And so the whole idea around how do we build the right service design starts in R&D, but who's really doing it? Is R&D doing it, or some service development function, service engineering function doing that in concert with R&D, so that when we are, again, designing a customer experience, we're doing it from a standpoint of holistically thinking about the implications, the choices that are being made in product development on the rest of the services operations. So product portfolio is, again, so think about your existing product organization and how are you dealing with existing, called the mainline products, as well as your legacy product support plans. And you notice when we've got service offer development really is in both places, both when I launch a new product or over time perhaps I mature, change, evolve my offers for support for my existing product portfolio, warranty renewals, and those sorts of things. So that work needs to get done, be thought out, that we need to make sure we're consistent in how we do pricing for our support, for our product plans, for our service offers, and those kinds of things. And again, thinking about those things in one place with one set of eyes, looking at that Again, we're bringing in the cross-functional organizations that need to be involved at some level in making those decisions, because they have to many times deliver on the underpinnings of what those things are. And then field and customer support. So we have all the functions of whether it's the field techs or our level 1, 2, 3, 4 help desks that might be a part of these functions. Our depot operations, again, are things that we as an organization need to be thinking about, again, from a holistic point of view. And so the question I have for all of you on the webcast is, are those things in your companies thought about together, or are they thought about separately, and then we try to connect the dots later? Every company is different in a different place. We've seen it done well in some places and not so well in others. But the framework, again, is a wonderful tool to try to bring together, thinking about how do I want to design this. And by the way, once we stare at this and we start to decompose some of these things, we start to find some of the weak links. And as an example that I'll pick on is that we often find knowledge management as a weak point in a lot of companies. Is we're having learnings every day out there in the field with our products, and they're not always being captured in a way they can be quickly and easily shared with other folks in the organizations, other GOs, the R&D organization to make a fix. So knowledge management we see as commonly as a place of that is underutilized or underperforming in a service engineering framework environment. So anyway, hopefully I've just kind of got a good summary of why the framework, why we think it's important. And now what I'd like to do is move to Val and let him talk about, from a TSIA point of view, some thoughts and thought leadership in this area. So Val, the floor is yours.
Great, Randy. So just a real quick intro about TSIA for those of you that don't know us. We're a membership organization with over 500 members, and we conduct research, sponsor conferences, and provide other services to tech companies. We've been closely following the tech industry for many years, and we published 3 books, and we've got a 4th coming this spring, which we'll launch at our May conference in San Diego. And the great part about these books is that they've documented the industry transformation that's taken place, its impact on all of us, and what we need to do to succeed. So if we move to the next slide, over the years, what we've done is we've developed frameworks, just like Randy noted, and talk about different service business models for our member companies to help them understand and navigate their way through these changes. And, in order to survive, I think that, along the bottom you can see that, as products commoditize and, you start to see new revenue opportunities, companies have been moving away from, the simple warranty, support, and maintenance agreements, and they've moved towards, coming up with services that they could deliver throughout the customer life cycle. But what we've noticed over the last few years is that purchase models are changing. Companies are no longer doing the big CapEx purchases up front. And so whereas money used to come in up front and then used to provide support, customers are starting to say, well, let's wait a little bit, and maybe, I'm looking for you to help me achieve my outcome, and I'm just going to buy from you and use only what we consume. So we start to see this, and I'm not going to go through everything here. You can have it after the fact. But for today's discussion, I really want to focus in on the areas noted in red. And these are some of the capabilities that are usually associated with service engineering. So if we can move to the next slide, when Randy and I talk about service engineering, as he said in the beginning, a lot of the discussion is centered around the capabilities that companies need to build into their organization. I'm going to share some research findings that show why formalizing these capabilities into the org structure is equally important. So as a research organization, we conduct a number of studies on an ongoing basis, and one of them is the biennial organization study. And over the years of looking at these industry trends and company responses to these trends, we've identified a few problems with today's typical org structure, and it's really based on the inability to satisfy future customer expectations. So, a lot of this was informed by these studies and over time. And if we could move to the next slide, it gives you a quick look at the current organizational construct that's in place today. First of all, this type of traditional full-service business model, at the end of the day, we like to say that it resembles a bucket brigade. It's typically sales and development led, and one function equals one organization, and each organization performs a task for the customer, and the customer ends up getting handed off between organizations throughout their life cycle. What we typically see is that the headquarters is central, and all the field operations are geo-based. People typically go to market through a horizontal approach versus a vertical approach. And, what we've seen is that, headquarters, central, has been a bad thing, and that budgets have weighed heavily towards execution and delivery and less on this idea of planning and design. Ultimately, the goal of these structures that we've seen that have been in place for decades is that we want to optimize the function and control the organization's performance. Unfortunately, there are a couple problems with this, and if we move to the next slide, I've identified, based on some of the industry trends that we've been tracking, that this structure is under stress, and I'm going to talk about three of them and the implications for this service engineering function. Number one is that historically it's been a geocentric approach to engaging customers, and as I've mentioned a couple of times, a lot of the future revenue growth is going to come from after the initial sale, and we call the total cycle land, adopt, expand, and renew. So my point is that the land piece is going to diminish in stature, and there's going to have to be a lot of focus on adopt, expand, and renew. The issue with that is that when you start to look at customers and you try to leverage data and try to capture the success that's going on, individual regions that are geocentric, and focused on delivery are really going to have a tough time solving that problem. So that's our first stress point, is that everything has been delivery focused and geocentric, and we think that it's going to be too important to have that type of varied and scattershot approach to some of these issues. The second stress point is, what I'll call stovepipe service P&Ls. In order to create a consistent customer experience, the classic structure of a professional service organization or a field or support, they're going to start to blur, and you're going to really require integration and collaboration, and it's not going to help the way it is set up today for each of these organizations and product lines to create their own new offers and to try to pull together their own resources to make this happen. So this becomes a really inefficient way to do it at a time when everybody's under cost pressures. The third stress point that we see is that the reliance on horizontal go-to-market. This is all about, the future is all about helping customers achieve their business outcomes, and there's going to be a need to address things vertically. So, in order to make this these handoffs kind of disappear, these organizations are going to really need to work together and look at it from a vertical perspective versus an organizational function perspective. So, given that we have these types of stress points on the current structure, we've identified a few principles for what the future should look like, and you'll see that there's an awful lot of language here that supports the capabilities of a service engineering function. So the goal has to be to create a great, easy customer experience. Some of the principles I listed here, you got to focus on eliminating those handoffs. There is a reliance on central versus the geo. And when you look at some of the organizational recommendations, we're talking about creating and changing the budgets more towards a planning and design and far less on delivery, because we have to be consistent in how we go to market. And so you'll start to see new organizations come into play, things like customer success or success science, where you're going to actually focus on, after the initial sale, helping customers achieve excellence, and that's going to come through service delivery. You're going to see analytics organizations come into play, where the collection of data that's either gathered automatically or through some type of knowledge management platform can be used to inform new offers that can help customers achieve their outcomes. And then, of course, the service engineering function. So, wherever you have a focus on efficiency, we believe you should centralize and standardize. And I think analytics is going to become a strategic capability. So when you look at the next slide, we've got an example of an organizational construct that we've seen a few of our members begin to put these pieces into play. And I won't go through a lot of it, but marketing is really focused on landing the deal, and sales are really organized vertically. And of course, you've got your other infrastructure, product development, finance. But you'll see in the middle, there's a big focus on customer growth, that adopt, expand, renew activity that we want to look at. And we see a lean global service delivery structure in place, as well as customer success and service operations, really headlined by things like service engineering and business ops, and a very formal way to capture things like adoption offers and success science and knowledge management. So we think that the time is right to launch this Service Engineering 2.0, as Randy kicked off, and we think that frankly, companies are going to need to do this to succeed in the future.
Okay, Val, thank you very much for that, for sharing that with the group. And so I want to go into this last section, and then, as Thomas indicated, we'll take questions from the group. You can put them into the Q&A panel, and we'll be happy to answer as many questions as we can at the end here. But I want to talk about the transformation of the service engineering function. So if you're, as a company, thinking, okay, I want to take a step towards doing this, and how might I go about it, is one thing I'd ask folks to do is irrespective of how you feel about consultants, one thing that consultants do well is, if they're good at what they do, is they have a structured way they go about problem solving. And a structured way they go about problem solving in a way that tries to bring together multifunctional parts of something into a solution that can actually solve the problem. And every company's got its way about how it goes about doing transformation. This is certainly our approach, and perhaps if there's some takeaways here that would be helpful to you, I'd ask you to at least think about these, if not engage us to help you with this process, because sometimes that third-party insight can be helpful in either bringing new perspectives or bringing an objective point of view where you might have individual organizations that are in contention about certain things. So anyway, well, let me just, without further ado, and this actually is, so I've got a step 1, 2A, and 2B to talk about, briefly here. And for us, is a starting point when we're working with somebody is to create this strategy on a page, and we apply the same concept or methodology to any service domain, any service problem. In this case, so this actually is a specific one that we did with a client not too long ago, names removed to protect the innocent, so to speak. But in this case, we're trying to help an organization design a new, more cohesive service engineering function using our new 2.0 construct. And the whole idea of the service engineering on page is to get people in the organization rallied around, okay, this is the vision we have for delivering an exceptional customer experience. And again, it's not about the function so much as how do we get the customer to where we deliver an exceptional experience and do it consistently and predictably. And again, as we, key message here is we think service engineering is where that function lives in a field services organization or a hardware company. And strategy is, then, what's our strategy to actually bring that together, some goals that we want to achieve, what are the initiatives that we would undertake to actually accomplish those things, and then certainly deciding, how are we going to measure success of the function when it's all done. We're going to measure customer sat, first visit resolution, service costs, or revenue growth, lots of different ways, and those things may be different for you. I'd further add, too, that those metrics might change based on where you are in your evolution, what metrics you pick today. If you're in a very nascent service engineering construct and trying to build your capabilities here, you might want to measure different things that you might measure a year or two from now when those processes are underway and running the way that you would like them to. But the service engineering strategy on a page, again, is our way of helping our organization start with really getting a clear picture, getting tops-down support for, yep, this is what we want to deliver. And notice, again, this is not an organizational statement here. This is focused on the customer. This is the experience we want to deliver to the customer. We're all going to get rallied around what it's going to necessarily take in order for us to accomplish that. The late Dr. Stephen Covey once said, begin with the end in mind. For those of you who read his wonderful book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, we think the end in mind, at least a starting point, is our framework. It gives you an opportunity to think about, okay, well, where are these things going to live, and am I, irrespective of the organization, am I putting them in place? And so you've heard both me and Val say fewer handoffs is a good thing, because when we have handoffs internally, we know what those handoffs are, but every time we have a handoff, too often the customer feels a handoff, but when that happens, generally speaking, it's not a good thing. So we are, our suggestion is you start with the end in mind, and the end in mind is as a framework, something like this. Draw your picture however you think it might be. We're going to make this, by the way, available to people at the conclusion of the broadcast. Thomas will talk to you about how to get that. And then decide some metrics. What are those metrics that you think are important? We've got some examples down here like customer sat, first visit, mean time to repair, et cetera. Those things, those metrics are just meant to be examples. Your metrics may be different. They may be the same. They may be different depending on your evolution of where you're starting from and where you're intending to get. But transforming the function, we think then starts with picking, getting real specific on, okay, how am I going to build the capabilities that I decided I was going to build, by the way, in my strategy on a page. And then step 2B is, okay, well, let's get on with it. And let's assess that. If I think about my target state, is how would I go about assessing where we're at? So am I going to break down, every element of that of this framework here on this page in some way, compare myself to performance and gap analysis, and so that's something we do for companies. It's certainly something you can do yourself. TSIA, is on the line here, and they've got some excellent research and data, benchmark data you can use to help benchmark yourself in certain areas of your business. And I know a number of you on the phone have used those services with TSIA before. And then architecting the to-be state, right? Going back to the framework and saying, okay, well, if this is my target state right here on the right side of this page, what's my architecture going to look like? And again, we give you a generic example, at least as a starting point. And then last is to define an execution plan. How do I get from where I am to where I want to be? How big is that effort? How much is it going to cost? What people am I going to need? How long is it going to take to get there? Do I need to do it in steps or phases? And how that's going to work? Essentially, we just did a major review of a big multinational company that's multi-billion dollars in size, have a real complex hardware, software, field services infrastructure. And we looked at 2 of their very largest clients and broke those down into a lot of the elements or components of what was delivering the results that they were getting on their first visit resolution line as an example. And again, I would come back to it's the handoffs that we found were a big part of the difference between fixing something on the first visit versus those things that weren't. And when we looked at the infrastructure, how those things were designed from the beginning, they were done in many, many different places. And our advice to that particular organization was you've got to find a way to bring the thinking about that customer experience design back to a singular place so that we can think about it all at once and produce a better result. So I'll finish before our Q&A here with the simple, people ask me from time to time, okay, well, Randy, you guys work with lots of companies and this stuff. What, kind of cut to the quick on, the things that you think are really, really important here. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but tops-down support is really important here. Over the years, if you've had acquisitions and lots of changes in the organization, as lots of tech companies do, is sometimes the customer gets lost in the process, and bringing that back to, the individual fiefdoms have got to go away. And the customer's got to be king. We've got to drive toward operational efficiency. And I know at the very least, hopefully most of us care about our customer. I know our CEOs of every company care about the experience we're delivering, so that's where we really got to start. We've got to evaluate every choice we make through the eyes of the customer, and I know I'm hammering on this point about handoffs, but we see it's so prevalent is the handoffs typically become the points of failure that the customer feels and experiences on their end. No failures, by the way, is the goal. Now, in the end, we all know that that's probably a bit unrealistic, and we get that. But first visit resolution should be a goal, and doing it consistently, predictably, so that when something does go wrong, hopefully it gets fixed, by the way, with our shift left strategy, right? And hopefully I've solved the problem with a remote diagnostic, or I've solved it with a helpful help desk that was aided by some knowledge management tool because we fixed the same problem yesterday. First visit, no failures is the goal, but first visit resolution is absolutely a must. So with that, I appreciate everyone listening, and we move to our Q&A section. And so I'll turn the agenda back to Meredith, and who's going to manage our Q&A session. So Thomas.
Yes, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Val, for presenting that to us. We do have questions coming in, so I've got those pulled together, but please keep them coming. If something comes up, enter it in the questions window there on your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll work to get those answered if we have enough time. Just wanted to remind everybody, as you see, there was a ton of valuable content in this deck, so if this is something you might want to circulate around your organization, just email your request to info@rtmconsulting.net. I'll get you a PDF copy of that deck, and you can circulate that as you see fit. So the questions, let's just get started here. And Randy, this one I'll give to you. It just came in, but I think it's a good one to start with. It's regarding this function of service engineering. How do you justify the expense of this operation? He says, my senior management team sees some of this as overhead.
Yeah, so we certainly get that most places. Field services in general are under enormous cost pressures today, and I certainly understand that. And so the question I ask is, what are the costs of today's failures? And so, one of the examples is if you, and I'm going to back the slides up for a moment here, if you were, whether we did this for you, you did this on your own, is part of what we're trying to figure out is that if my first visit resolution performance is making us up 75%, you have to ask yourself, what's the cost of doing that, and why is that occurring? And so, service engineering, one of the things we have seen is that organizations have allowed their businesses to continue to wield the cost cutting because they're not fighting back with data. And data that we find when we analyze what's happening in the service performance value chain is when we have a point of failure, what's that costing the company? And the whole idea here is to build the point of, if I could move my FBR from 75 to 95, how much do I save in doing that? But therefore, in order to do that, what I need is a better service engineering design as an example to close that gap. And we see that gap, by the way, in issues related to whether it's labor, vehicle, parts cost, just losing customers that don't come back, people don't renew their warranties, whatever it might be. So to me, the way you justify it is you go figure out, okay, where am I failing? What's my gap from best practice? And then get the data that they basically said, what does that cost us? And then therefore, if I was to build a more robust service engineering capability to eliminate those points of failure, what does that ROI look like? And so I do know most good CEOs, CFOs will at very least consider data. And most of the very good ones will react to it and say, okay, if that's what it takes to fix the problem, let's put those things in place and fix the problem. So anyway, I hope that helps, Thomas.
Yeah,
Hey,
very good.
hey Randy. Randy,
Go ahead, Val.
just something to add on that. I think that from a delivery perspective, just because you don't create a service engineering function doesn't mean that the work goes away or the need isn't there. And what starts to happen, at least what we see, is that this geocentricity for a lot of field service organizations, people start, they have a problem. They have to figure out a way to reduce their costs, and they start to create their own little, I'll call it a skunk works, and their own little functions in all these different regions to try to solve this problem. And it's really better served by, pulling those resources together and actually formalizing the function. So I think you can find the monies out there today, and it's critically important to leverage that from a central standardized location.
That's a great point, Val. And when we've done our service engineering analysis, we do find where there are pieces of this places that you actually are investing in. The question is, are you investing in the most efficient and effective way? So I agree with everything you said, and so thank you for throwing that in as well. So, Thomas, what's the next one for us?
I got one here that came in when you were talking about the steps take to make improvements to this, and they're asking, where do you see field services teams fail on implementing when they're improving the customer experience?
It's a lot of what we've been sharing, but I'll just say that again is having no overriding purpose, I guess, would be the best way for me to start with. Is that am I really reacting to cost cutting or a bad customer service report, and then I go beat the FS organization to death with a rubber hose, or am I really stepping back and focusing on, okay, what's the overriding purpose here, and how do I fix the problem in a systematic way? We see the handoffs I've mentioned are clearly a point of failure, and sometimes that's also says because of the fiefdoms that have grown up, or we've drawn these lines of demarcation between organizations that aren't as productive as they need to be, and not because it's necessarily anybody's trying to do anything in a disingenuous way, or maybe they are trying to create a fiefdom, but again, the net effect to the customer is when there's a handoff, too often the times we feel those handoffs. I mentioned knowledge management systems as another point of failure we see. Again, I don't mean the systems tool itself. I mean a process in which I have recognized that knowledge is really valuable in this environment. And every time I learn something about our tool, our product, our software, a place where this system is integrated with something we've never integrated with before, that knowledge and then quickly sharing it with everybody in the ecosystem is really, really important. And most organizations are missing a major opportunity because they really haven't thought through how to do that. And by the way, again, that's a process issue, not a tools issue. And what we also see organizations is, okay, I'll go get a knowledge management tool, I'll buy it, put it in, poof, I think the problem went away. And knowledge management tools don't solve the problem. Knowledge management tools are only an enabler to a great process that says, I'm going to capture knowledge, I'm going to share it, refine it, and use it in the most productive way in the best interest of my customer and in driving our service costs down.
Right. Okay, thank you, Randy. I got one here. Val, I'm going to give this one to you. This one came in as you were going through your slides and your content, and you did mention it briefly, but maybe we can take a little time to talk more about it. Why the big push to vertical markets?
That's a good question. I think the single biggest factor is, companies have historically delivered a product and they've maintained it, and then they've moved on to the next sale. We've seen a significant shift where customers are insisting on suppliers to help them achieve their business outcome. And whenever you talk about business outcomes, it by definition, it becomes vertical in nature. So, simply dropping off a product and letting the customer take over and, to use their own expertise to help improve the process, those days are quickly behind us. What's starting to happen is this push to outcome-based engineering requires a understanding of the vertical and specific issues with the customer, and I think that's the big shift, and as a result, you have to respond, and you have to go to market in that vertical versus the old horizontal way.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Val. Okay, guys, I've got 12:58 Eastern time here. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we're getting close here to the top of the hour. Randy has put a contact slide up there. You can certainly jot that down and email Val or Randy if you have any questions that come up after we sign off today. Randy, did you have any final thoughts before we sign off and say goodbye?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks for everyone for joining us. I hope this has been valuable, and again, if you want a copy of the deck, just send it to info@rtmconsulting.net, and somebody will get you that. I want to thank Val for joining us as well, and TSI has got some great research information, and between their research and our capabilities to help people transform, we can really help organizations with this. We hope it's been of value to you. I hope people will take away just that, probably the most key message is if you want to deliver a superior customer experience in today's environment, it's absolutely imperative that people think about that from the customer's perspective and think about it in a more holistic fashion. And you have to do it in a tops-down way. Every company's trying to deal with this, and data is king in these environments. And so the one thing I've seen helping organizations that are getting squeezed on costs is pushing back on let's do this from an ROI point of view, and here's how we deliver a customer experience that we want to deliver at a lower cost, but do it in a more systematic way. And so instead of cutting by death by 1,000 cuts, we get at producing a more streamlined services set of processes by thinking about it in a, I'll just say, a more systematic way. I hope the framework is helpful in doing that, and I hope TSI's points of view on the organizational aspects, I think, are extremely relevant to the message we were trying to deliver. So, Thomas, with that, that's what I want to conclude. Bell, anything you'd like to say as well?
Oh, thanks, Randy, for the invitation. As always, it's a pleasure working with RTM. Got a great partnership working with you guys, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Great. Thanks.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us today in the past hour. Randy, I would like to thank you, too, for talking on this webcast and sharing your perspective. And with that, folks, we will sign off. That's the end of the webinar. I hope everyone has a good day. And we'll talk to you later.